You are now listening to Project XX Cast podcast series.
Hello everybody, I'm Tilly from Project X, and today we're going to be doing a podcast about ASB, which is also known as antisocial behaviour, where we have young people asking the questions that they think are important to them and others in the community. Would everybody like to introduce themselves?
My name's Luke Bland.
Hello, my name's Sergeant Anthony Day. I work for South West PCU, which is the South West of London Police.
Hello there, my name is Hazard Said. I'm the Community Safety Officer for Kingston. We're part of the Safer Kingston Partnership.
Samantha Jordan, Community Safety Officer at Kingston Borough Council.
So what is considered as antisocial behaviour?
From a policing perspective, antisocial behaviour, everyone's got their own ideas of what is antisocial. So there's what the community considers as a level, a level where, if you saw somebody committing something or doing something, would you accept that? There is a legislation version, and this is something that is written down within legislation, which the government have decided, and this comes under the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act. And with a very broad spectrum, it just says that anything that's going to cause somebody harassment, alarm, or distress. So that they want to keep it broad, because basically what I want to say is, if somebody's harassed by your behaviour, or somebody's alarmed by it to the point they feel the need to say something, or they're distressed by what they're looking at, that's antisocial. It's antisocial to the community. So that's broadly what it is. Trying to pinpoint it, like specifically, could be a lot more difficult, because it really can be anything. But we take each problem as it comes.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, and in terms of the broad definition, I think it's helpful because different people have different ideas of what they find is antisocial. So what might be alarming to one person might not necessarily be alarming to another. So having a broad definition just helps everybody else kind of get their own. They can report it if they feel that it's antisocial, whereas somebody else may not necessarily report that, and then it will be investigated as it comes.
Just adding on, everyone, I think this is about the week, is focusing what antisocial behaviour is. I think they've both explained it well, but I think a lot of people still don't understand that the perpetrators or the victims still don't know they're involved in antisocial behaviour. That's partly why we're doing awareness, trying to make people more alert that what you might think and people not how to report what's ASB. So when we can talk about from being a dog's nuisance, from your loud music and the criminal, but these all can be seen as ASB nuisance. But we just want to make sure no one's being affected, and we're making someone in the community feel safe and a voice has been heard.
My next question was, can antisocial behaviour happen in schools? And if so, do you have any idea what schools do to prevent it?
Yeah, I mean, antisocial behaviour, as it is, there's a broad line with schools, because it's got a structured kind of side to it, and obviously the teachers have certain rules and regulations they need to adhere to. But antisocial behaviour, you've got to be mindful that you're not moving into bullying. So if it's children that are being annoying to each other, but equally, inside and outside of schools. So I'll give you an example of a school that empties out at 3 o'clock, and then all those kids descend on those bus stops. And what you tend to get is, the euphoria of being outside of a school, but also potentially whoever's that strongest peer, whoever that person is who controls the roost, within that school, potentially can raise the levels of large groups of kids, and you can have kids kind of latching onto that. So it does happen in schools, and whilst from the Met Police perspective, the schools officers that we have are there to assist with that, and it's an education as much as it is anything else, because we're not looking at children at the school ages. We're not looking at enforcement to them unless absolutely necessary, and the necessary side of that would be far along, after huge amounts of support and education. So I'd look at those teachers and those advocates and those different kind of functions within the school first off to deal with misbehaviour, and then when it moves outside of that school into the community as antisocial behaviour, and then what we don't want it to get to is criminal behaviour, where we actually do have to act because there's a statute that says we have to. So yeah, I mean the schools themselves, challenging, very challenging environment for them. Every day they've got to maintain that standard. Every day they've got to put those not put those kids into check, allow personalities to come out, allow people to build themselves as young people, but have a level where you know, you have to accept that at some point somebody's going to say no,
Yeah.
and you have to believe that. So from my perspective, yeah, that's the you know, the kind of schools element within what I deal with as well.
I think Sam probably covered a bit more of school, but I just want to give a practical kind of stuff where I've had a case where I had exactly what Sergeant Daly's saying, where I've had a young person where it's a member of staff, it started off in school and then it ended up, because they knew where the member of staff lived, because she lived in part of the communities, it started to just be a fun joke, knocking on the door, laughing because it's a member of staff. But then it's got a family, and that's when it got big, blown out of proportion. Friends got involved, peer. A lot of things with ASB, like sometimes with young people, in my opinion, I don't know how the other profession, sometimes peer pressure do it. I don't think no one's individually bad. We just go get carried away with the crowd, and we need to explain. So we did a lot of intervention with the school in that project, with the teacher, and we worked and just make it explain about the boundaries. And it was a bit hard work, but it worked. And it's about working in partnership with professionals, with this young person, the family, and seeing them to get the support. And I think ultimately the young person in the end was like, I just wanted to be funny in front of my friends. I didn't know I was hurting someone, but sometimes it's just, we went down to the nitty gritty just to find out what was the issue, and it was all cleared.
The second part of your question, in terms of like spreading awareness, I think that's the important way that schools can deal with it, just making sure that teachers and students know what is antisocial behaviour both inside and outside of the classroom. The more kind of informed that people are, then, you know, the more aware they're going to be of their behaviour and what is and isn't acceptable. And then, you know, that's the best way of preventing something.
And just before we go, one of the main things we did, and it's going to come out throughout the things, and your later question, and I don't want to go too much, mediation is such a good positive thing. Sometimes just sitting down and talking how we are today, having a dialogue and getting it all out and clear in the air is one of the best things. And we feel like everyone has a voice to say or something, as long as it's in a safe environment. But that's what we found is quite important for schools, to make sure they have that, hear to the young person's voice and the people involved as well.
So my next question, kind of covered a bit, but to go a bit more depth, is what is the difference between crime and antisocial behaviour?
Yeah, it's an absolute key question here, because there's always that analogy that antisocial behaviour is just low-level crime. It's all right, doesn't matter. It's low-level crime, and it's so much more than that. It is the analogy that I use quite often is that a person who reports a crime to the police maybe does it once in their life, if they're unlucky, you know, more times. But if they do it once in their life, and the service that we provide there is, you know, is that key. You know, the fact that they've felt the need, that something's occurred and they've had to report it. Somebody can be a victim of antisocial behaviour for years and just really soak it in, because their levels of acceptability and maybe they're looking at, maybe it's kids, maybe it's their neighbours. It doesn't have to just be children. It could be anything, and they could just soak that in, and to a point where, you know, it becomes the norm. They just get numb to it. They don't realise that actually there is something that can be done about this, but you just need to understand that, and that defined line, that as was mentioned, that antisocial behaviour, where it starts off potentially is a bit of fun, potentially is something that it's no big thing. You know, we didn't mean harm, and it moves into crime very quickly. And you know, the fact that there is an actual, you know, statute, an act that is labelled antisocial behaviour, should tell you everything about how that small act, that knocking on the door, that shouting across the road, builds and builds into something that then eventually turns into harassment. It can turn into other crimes as well. And you know, the analogy probably isn't there for a lot of people, and certainly for a lot of people who, in terms of their awareness of what their behaviour is seen as, because when you shout at somebody across the road, you just think, oh, it's a lot, it's fine, you know, I didn't mean anything. But to that person individually, in their heart, you know, if they've heard that 20 times that day, and they go back and then they feel that, and you know, we do have unfortunately historical situations. The Fiona Pilkington case, key, exactly where this was treated as low-level antisocial behaviour, and really was a crime against that family. And you know, that's ideally, you know, from my perspective and the job I do, is everything to not have that happen again ever. Treat these people, you know, what they say, what their gripe is, no matter how small. You know, my neighbours, I mean, I can give you an exact example, and I won't say where it is, but there is an issue occurring at the moment within my area where it is an audible deterrent for animals in a garden. Seems totally innocuous, crazy that the police should be dealing with such. But the family next door, that is causing them so much grief and so much internal stress that it's affecting their family life, because all they hear is this deterrent going on. And you can see how he's not done anything wrong. He's not broken the law by putting a deterrent out. But actually, slowly but surely, after being told how it affects the neighbours, how it affects the family, the children, that it's actually moved into a criminal act, and it really has. And we're having quite frank discussions with him to empathise and to say, look, just see it from their perspective. Imagine you were the other way around. How would you feel? And empathy is a large thing with antisocial behaviour. So I try to say to people is empathise what the victim feels. Empathise where you were there, and now see whether your behaviour is acceptable or not. Otherwise, unfortunately, it will move to crime.
I will add on to that. I think the police is always going to do ASB crime, and that's a big thing. We always know police ASB crime, but there is ASB. We've got other tools. It can become a civil wrong as well. So we have a simple thing. Like an example, me and Sam could be living each, and Sam's going to cross my path, and I have an overgrown thing that's going to cause a nuisance. So I have statutory kind of rights under civil to get involved in environmental law protections as well for littering. So with ASB, one thing, we've got a wide range of things to use with antisocial behaviour. So if there's a crime being breached, the police get involved. But sometimes it's low level, and there is now acts and laws to make sure we can deal with it. The final is criminals, it was, as I said, crime, then the police gets criminal activities. But there is civil litigation, and sometimes I think members of public, to be honest, I'm not going to lie, even Sam probably would say, members of within the community and the council may not be known that we have these powers, but there is powers to prevent things and make people feel safe, and doesn't everything needs to be seen as a crime. I think people just associate ASB with crime, but it's just, there's two separate things, and sometimes we need to make that clear.
Yeah, and I think we've kind of said low level quite a bit, and I think that phrase in itself is really unhelpful, because if you're a victim of that, if someone's saying low level, you might feel that, that's really downplaying it. And I think the truth of it is antisocial behaviour can have really detrimental impacts. It can cause people mental health issues. It can cause people to take their lives. It is an extremely serious thing to be a victim of.
And one thing I'll say, if a young person's listening to or their family listen to this, if you're not sure, get in touch with your local council, the community safety. At least we can guide you and put you in the right signpost. If it needs to go to police, we work really close with our partners, the police or the fire brigade, environmental. Just get in touch with us. We're there to support the members of the community, and that's what we'll encourage you to do.
You are now listening to Project XX Cast podcast series.